Hello everybody, this is Miss Smith and we are going to try and make a video here about how to annotate for understanding. So I started doing this with the interlopers in an earlier video that didn't work, so hopefully this one works a little bit better. I'm going to keep building on what I did before. So I'm going to review what I did in paragraph 2 and then I'm going to keep going a little bit. So I noticed this first sentence was really long and it had some tricky words in it, so I wanted to go back and try and figure out what it was saying. The forest lands of Gradwitz were of wide extent and well stocked with game. The narrow strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable for the game it harbored or the shooting it afforded, but it was the most jealously guarded of all its owners' territorial possessions. So that overwhelmed me. I stopped listening to what it was saying and I just was trying to pronounce the words right, so I need to go back and figure out what it's saying before I move on to the next sentence. So I started again. The forest lands of Gradwitz were of wide extent and well stocked with game. Now I highlighted extent there because even though I've heard the word extent used, I wanted to make sure that it made sense in the sentence. So the forest lands of Gradwitz were of wide extent, maybe like of a wide distance. Maybe they were pretty big. So I'm going to put a note here, big. And well stocked with game. And we talked before about how game in this story means like animals that are being hunted. So it sounds like the lands are big and there were a lot of animals you can hunt in them. The narrow strip of precipitous woodland that lay on its outskirt was not remarkable. So the narrow strip of precipitous, in order to determine that this word meant wet, I was thinking of precipitation, which is a word that I hear in the weather a lot. So precipitation means rain, so I'm guessing that the woodland that they're talking about is really wet or rainy, that lay on its outskirt. Again, this is kind of background knowledge. I think when something is on the outskirts, it's kind of on the edges or in the distance. So the part of land that is on the edges, that's really rainy and wet, was not remarkable for the game it harbored. From me being living in Baltimore for the last 4 years, I know that harbored can mean a place where boats go, but that doesn't make sense here because the animals are not being boated. But maybe like kept. I'm just guessing here because it seems like it makes sense in context. Was not remarkable for the game it kept in it, for the animals that were in it, or the shooting it offered. But it was the most jealously guarded of all its owners' territorial possessions. So I understood the words in the last part, but I just want to check that I understood the sentence as a whole. So the land is big, it's wide, well stocked with animals. The narrow strip, the little bit of wet woodland on the edges, doesn't really have a lot of animals in it for shooting, but it's remarkable because it is the most jealously guarded of all its owners' territories, all of the owners' land. So the edges are the most guarded because of jealousy. That's all it's really saying. The part about the animals being well stocked within the land is not the most important for my summary. So what I did just now to make sense of the first sentence is I read it all the way through. Then I realized I wasn't really paying attention to what it's saying, which is a good step. So I went back and reread, which is a good strategy. I identified words I didn't know and tried to find words that made sense in context or used background knowledge to define them. Then I reread again and tried to summarize what the sentence said now that I redefined the words. And then at the end of the whole chunk, I summarized. So I'm going to try that again for those of you who are lost. A famous lawsuit in the days of his grandfather had wrested it. All right, right away I'm noticing a word that I'm not familiar with. From the illegal possession of a neighboring family of petty landowners. So a famous lawsuit in the days of his grandfather, so like a long time ago, had wrested it from the illegal possession. So I'm guessing that they got the land back from a lawsuit a long time ago. So maybe it was theirs, somebody illegally took the land, and then they got it back in the lawsuit. The dispossessed party, had never acquiesced in the judgment of the courts. So the dispossessed party, I'm guessing that if possession is something that you own, and dis means not, So this means like the other family, the family that lost the land in the lawsuit. The other party had never acquiesced in the judgment of the courts. Now that word, and a long series of poaching, affrays, and similar scandals and bitter the religion. Okay, for me, if I'm just using context clues, I'm probably still not going to be able to guess acquiesced. That might be one of those words that either I skip because I don't have access to a dictionary or I look up. Now, I know from my own research that acquiesced means that you like go along with. I'm going to write over my writing. I know that's bad. Go along with. And the judge, so they didn't go along with the judgment that the courts handed them. So it sounds like they are still on the land, using the land, because they're not listening to the courts and giving back the land that they took. And a long series of poaching, affrays. I know poaching is also like hunting, and similar scandals had embittered the relationship. So it's sounding like they're continuing to hunt in the land, and that's creating a bitter relationship between the families for 3 generations. So to review what I did to make sense of this text was for the second sentence, I immediately identified words I didn't know. I went back and reread. I tried to guess the meaning of the words I didn't know. I reread the sentence again in a way that made sense to me now that I knew the unknown word, and then I moved on. So before I move on to the next sentence or even the next chunk of a sentence, I'm checking to make sure, did I really understand what the last part told me? If not, let's go back, reread, redefine, reword, and then you can try moving on again. To define new vocabulary words, I used context clues. In the case of acquiesced, a dictionary. I've used my background knowledge. Maybe I broke the word apart, like rested looks like wrestled. So maybe it means to kind of like wrestle it from somebody, to take it from somebody forcefully. And that's how I'm defining the words that I don't understand in the story. That's what annotating for understanding is. We're breaking down each part of a sentence or part of a text, making sure that we understand it and correcting ourselves if we don't by making guesses, asking questions, defining new words.